Hello and welcome to my first video tutorial. Today I'm going to be making a quick guide on getting started in 14eredit and particularly going through some of the commands that I've put together. I've put together a list of commands which I'll link in the description, and they're quite a good way to get you started in the program or in the plugin. So for those of you who don't know what 14eredit is, it's a WorldEdit / Voxel Sniper alternative made by 14er, a guy from the CTM community Discord, and basically it gets updated really quickly. It's really powerful and it gives you a lot of options that WorldEdit and Voxel Sniper don't give you. Plus, Voxel Sniper isn't really supported past 1.9. It does continue to work, but the project I don't think is being actively worked on anymore. And so, you know, being having an up-to-date tool that will let you do all of the things that Voxel Sniper and WorldEdit will do is really useful, especially if you want to be working on maps that are up-to-date in the newest versions. Right, so without any further ado, let's get into this. Again, I will be referencing the command list that I've made and the basic documentation for 14eredit, both of which I will link in the description. But to get started, we're going to basically want a wand. So this is just like the wand in WorldEdit. So you just type in fx wand like that, and that will give you a wand. So fx wand will give you a selection wand, and that works in a similar way to WorldEdit, where you can left click and right click, and that will create a selection for you. Some other commands that are pretty useful. The first one is going to be creating a sphere brush. So if you type in this command, 0.5 set stone, it will create a brush with whatever's in your hand. So in this case, it hasn't worked because I'm using my hand itself. But if we type that again onto a tool, you can see that we can start creating these spheres of stone. And then I'll come back to kind of how to put that brush together, the syntax for it and everything. But one thing to note as well is how to undo. So we can undo just like that. And if we want to undo multiple steps, we can type /un and then a number, and that will take us back several steps. Then if we want to redo, it's literally just RE. And then again, if we want to do a certain number of steps, we can do it like that. So let's talk about the syntax of how a brush like this is made. So how do you know what all of this means? Well, the first thing to do is kind of break down each step. So fxbr is going to be our first thing. So br is short for brush. So we're making a brush. Pretty much every command in 14eredit, you're going to start with this /fx. That's how it knows that you're wanting to run a 14eredit command. And then there are several different things you can run from that point. I'm mostly going to be focusing on the brushes, so pretty much all of the commands we're doing today will begin with fxbr or fxbrush. br is just a shortened version. Then we need to pick the shape of the brush. So in this case, we're using a sphere. So you can either type out sphere, or you can use the abbreviated just S. So we've got our brush, fx brush, and then S for sphere. And then we need to set the radius of that sphere. So different shapes of brush will have different arguments and numbers that you'll put in to tell 14eredit about the shape that you want. So in this case, we're using our radius of 5, or we can set that up to say 11 or 50 or whatever we want to do with it. And then we need an adjustment for the shape of the sphere. So not all spheres are exactly the same. In Minecraft, there's many different methods of drawing a sphere, and so they will give different shapes. With a sphere, you generally want to use an adjustment of 0.5. I wouldn't mess around with it too much. 0.5 will give you quite a good point to be setting on with. And then finally, we want to put our operation in here. So what is the brush actually doing? So with this first one, we've got a really simple operation of just set stone. So that's going to set everything within the sphere to stone. So if we use that now, it should create a sphere of radius 11 that is just stone. And it will have replaced all of the dirt under here. Oh, whoops. I forgot I'd bound a brush to my hand. But all the dirt under there will also be stone. So if you accidentally create a brush on something that you don't want to, we can just type in fx_br none, and that will get rid of the brush on our hand. So we can no longer, we can now just use our hand as normal, and you can see the stone goes down under the surface as well. Okay, so that's kind of a really basic start point to be going on with. But obviously, you know, you don't just want to have spheres that look like this. So I'll go through some other examples of operations that we can use. So once again, we'll type in fx_br sphere, and then 5 is our radius, 0.5 is the adjustment to that, and then it's our operation. But in this one, instead of writing set stone, I can do an if statement. So one of the great things about 14eredit is it basically gives you the power to write computer code operations for your brushes. So in this case, you can do if stone. So that means if anything inside the brush is stone, then you can set it to whatever you want. So in this case, we're looking at if stone set dirt, and now you can see that we're replacing whatever's inside the area of this brush with dirt, and that gives us a lot of control. And that's how you do in WorldEdit. You just create the brush and then do /mask, but that's not always going to give you the control that you want. Sometimes you want to be able to put stuff just on top of. So if you want to place down grass, you can do that with 14eredit commands in ways that you can't do that in WorldEdit. And then if we want to do if fx_br sphere 5 0.5 if dirt set, and what we can do is we can set ratios of how much of each block we want. So in this case, if dirt set 50% dirt, semicolon 50% coarse dirt. So this semicolon is important. That will break up the ratios. And now, if we click on this dirt, you can see, I probably should have picked blocks that stand out a bit more, but you can see that some of it has become coarse dirt. So if I now edit that to be a grass block instead, let me make sure I'm not using my hand. If I set that to be a grass block instead, you know, we can now start to set some of the dirt to be grass blocks. So that's kind of the very basics. That's the stuff that you'd want to have just to be going on with. But one of the big things that people use Voxel Sniper for is obviously smoothing out terrain. So we'll get to how to do erosion and things like that. But firstly, I just want to show off a couple of the different brush shapes. So this is our sphere that will change dirt to grass. Now what we're going to do is create a cylinder brush. So in this one, we're typing fx_br, and then we can either type in cylinder, or we can just put in C for that. We need to set a radius for the cylinder, and this will be up and down as well as side to side, which is slightly frustrating. I think I would like to have the height of this cylinder and the width separate, but this is the way it is for now. And then we then put in an adjustment again. So this is the same thing as with the sphere brush. You just want to use 0.5 for this. And then we need to say 0, 1, or 2, which will decide what direction the cylinder is facing in. So if we put in 0 first, and then we'll just set stone as our operation at the end. So 7's the radius, 0.5 is the adjustment, and then 0 is the axis. So if I now use this cylinder brush, we get a cylinder that goes along like this, which you may want, or you may want it to go in the other direction. So this is with 2. So one of them's going along the x-axis and the other one's going along the z-axis. And then obviously with 1, we get a vertical cylinder. And you can start to kind of stack those on top of each other, like so, which is how I began making these trees. These are a work in progress that I'm kind of practicing how to make trees in 14eredit quickly, effectively. So yeah, you get a quick preview of those. But yeah, so you can create these big cylinder brushes which allow you to do cool shapes and stuff, and you can combine them together and it will give you something interesting. The next one to look at is the cube brush, which I think people use quite a lot. So again, FXBR, and then cube is the shape. And then we need to say the length of the sides. So previously everything's been radius. So a radius of 5 will give you a diameter of 10. But with the cube, it's just the length of each side. So in this case, 5. And then let's set to... we've done stone quite a lot, so let's do gold blocks, why not? And so we can then just use this and start to kind of build up with our cube brush shape like this, which I tend to use spheres in my mapping just because if you accidentally leave something, or if you don't quite erode everything, spheres look better, I think. They can still be obvious that you've used sphere brushes, but ultimately I don't think normal players will notice as much as other map makers will. But you can use stuff like these, and this is starting to begin to look like a tree, I suppose. So yeah, we can create a sphere brush or a cube brush or a cylinder brush. I won't get into the other types, they're all in the document, but one that is quite useful, you have diamonds, you have Splatter Brush, which will give you an array of spheres. So let's quickly look at that one. So the way we're going to do that is FXBR splatter, which is the shape of our brush, 10, which is the radius of the brush. I'm actually going to go for 15 here. And then how many smaller spheres do we want inside our radius? So in this case we want 5 smaller spheres. The next number is how big do we want the spheres inside, how big do we want these 5 spheres to be? So I'm going to go for 2, so a radius of 2. And then what's the adjustment for those spheres? Which is 0.5, and then set stone. So this looks a bit more complicated than it is. Again, the adjustment you don't need to worry too much about, but in basically kind of going from left to right, we've got the radius of that the brush is going to act in, we've got how many spheres it's going to create, and how big are the spheres. So now if I kind of show how this works, there's some being formed underground, but you can see it creates these spheres in kind of random places. So this could be the sort of a fun parkour map, or you can use this for creating block variation or whatever. It's there if you want it, obviously. And there are other things, so you can do random spheres. So rather than setting an exact radius, you set a minimum radius and a maximum, and it will create a sphere somewhere between those two, which can be really useful. And there's loads of other options. But I did kind of say I'm going to undo those splatter brushes because they're pretty ugly. But how do we get rid of having something that's this kind of blocky and cuboid? Well, the erosion in 14eredit I tend to use 3 brushes for. So I'm going to use arrows just to kind of mark out that they're different, like so. And we're going to now create a brush that runs a macro. It runs an operation that's kind of predefined and a bit more complicated than just the things we would type in ourselves. So in this case, let me just get my notes up. this is pretty much a brush that you are just going to copy and paste in rather than writing it yourself every single time. But it's going to be FX, once again, BR, sphere, and then we're going to create a radius of 0. And what that is going to do is make sure that the sphere acts around a single block. So this brush is selecting a single block, 0.5, and then macro. So that's the more complicated operation. And then in this case, the macro we're going to be using is erode. And whenever we have curly brackets like this in 14eredit, they're basically going to take arguments that the macro will use. So what do I mean by that? I mean a radius that you want it to erode around is the first one. So in this case, we're going to use 11. And then how do you want it to work? So generally, the second argument you're always going to use is melt. But then there are 3 arguments after that you can use. So cut is going to cut back. Raise is going to kind of build up from. And smooth is going to, as it says, smooth out. So sometimes you end up with kind of lumpy bits and bits that you want to just kind of smooth out. And those are our 3 modes that we're going to use. So here, okay, so we've written this brush. And I'm just going to select it all and copy it. So that's our cut brush. And when we use that, you can see it starts to erode away at the things we've built. But it makes them look a lot more natural. So obviously this isn't perfect, but you know, it looks better than just the spheres did. And you know, we can use that on different things to give us different results. But you can see sometimes it is a bit predictable. So with this cylinder, it's made it into completely one shape. So you may want to erode one side more and one side a bit less, like so, and kind of play around with it like that. If you've used Voxel Sniper before, then I don't think it's dissimilar, if slightly different. So the next one is lift. So raise, not lift. So rather than cut, we can say raise. And what that does is it kind of builds out from where we've started. But it can create this kind of checkerboard pattern. So that's when we're going to need our final one, which is smooth. So with this, it will kind of reduce those checkerboards quite a lot. And you want to combine all of these to give you something that you're happy with, obviously. And you'll be able to just play around with this a lot. But you want to combine all 3 really, and then just smooth things out as you need, raise things out a bit. And you can see that starting from an exact sphere and then just working with these brushes, we're able to get different shapes and different outlooks and handle things and get our terrain to look a lot more natural just by rotating between those 3. Right, so we've done basic operations, and we've done erosion, and we've done different brush shapes. And to be honest, that's everything you need to get started in 14eredit. However, I am going to spend a little bit of time now doing some more advanced operations. So you can either just check out here, or I'm just going to go through some of the operations that I've collected on the dock. So for instance, a grass brush. So there's different ways to do this. There is a macro for grass, but that will place it on anything, and that means anything. So grass will place itself on other lava, on other grass particles, or whatever. So one way you can do grass is obviously just a bone meal, but this gets pretty tedious because you may not want those exact flowers. You may not want, that mix of flowers, whatever. You may want some long grass, but you may not want that. And 14eredit gives you a huge amount of control over this. So this is one of the brushes that I made, or that I've got in the command list. And basically what this does, if I kind of walk you through it, so we're just making a brush that's a sphere shape with radius 7. And if there's a grass block and air, so if we detect an air block and it's got a grass block underneath it, so one block underneath is what this 0 - 1 0 does, Then it's going to set a ratio of 69% air, 29% grass, and 2% lily of the valley. And you can adjust these if you want more or less grass and different flowers, etc. But this is a pretty good starting point. And if you just use this, it will create quite a nice feel, I think. I think that ratio is about right. But you will notice that none of the grass is long grass. So if you don't want any long grass, that's perfect. But if you do want it, we can create another brush to help us get it. So what this brush is going to do is again detect if we've got it's going to detect if we've got a grass block with air above it, and then it's going to set this to be too high instead. So you can see that it just does it to some of them though. It doesn't do it to all the grass, and you can adjust the ratios to affect how much this does. But if we kind of walk through now, you can see there's some too high, some one high, still some flowers, and it gives you that feel that you want to do without having to go through and manually bone meal or do any of that stuff. Yeah, so that's kind of grass. Again, I'll link all these commands, but you can see it's setting lower and upper half of tall grass. Okay, so there's some other macros for us to look at as well. The one thing we haven't talked about is how to select and copy and paste and do all of those things. So we do have our selection wand. So one way we can do this is to select the corners, as I mentioned before. But what we can also do is we can type in FX once again, and instead of going for a brush with our BR, there are a couple of other options we can do at this point. So what we can do here is if we type in selection or cell for short, we can then, there's a few commands we can run after that. So in this case we can type in pos1, and that sets our first position to be where we are. Then if we come to the other corner that we want to use and type in fx cell pos2, that sets our second position. So now what we can do is fx cell copy, like so. And now if we paste that selection, you can see it's pasted in. This is going to depend on where you copied it from, I think. So let's just repaste. Let's undo that and then repaste it. So you might need to experiment a little bit. You can paste with offsets, but you just need to be a little bit careful about how it's going to work. Another thing you can do though is you can create schematics. So instead of fx cell, we can take that selection and type in fx schem for schematic, save, and then type in a name for this. So in this one we might want it to be outcrop 1, and that will save a schematic of this, of our selection. So then what we can do is, so that, yeah, it's done the saving. So then what we can do is we can do fx schem load, what was that one? Outcrop 1, and this will load in our schematic. And the schematics work slightly differently from the copy and paste. With the copy and paste, it works out, it pastes relative to where you were when you copied it, so that's the same as in WorldEdit. With the schematics though, it saves it from a specific corner, so the most negative corner on your coordinates. So here we're in, yeah, so this is, do you see as I move in this direction, the X and Z values are going down. These values here are going down. So the smallest corner is the corner that it will paste from in something like this. So it's always going to paste looking in that direction, like so. But schematics are really useful, and you can do some quite cool stuff with them. I've created a tree repository of schematics that you can also download. So if you want to do fxschem load once you've downloaded this into your world, and then you want to type in oak28, and that will give you a tree like that. Or let's go for big oak 1. And so you can instantly have these saved. FX. So if you wanna be able to just paste in stuff, you can have loads of different things saved in your schematics. So I've got this little log cabin that I made for the remake of Harbinger, and you can just put whatever you want in schematics, of course, as you would in WorldEdit. But it's a really helpful way to approach this. But what you may want to do, especially with selections, is you may want to create an operation that acts on selection. So if we go back over to our original outcrop, this one, which we had in our selection, we can also do fx cell op. So op is short for operation. And then if we want to tell it to do something in particular, this is how we do it. So in our case, if we wanted to say we want to change all of the stone in our selection to something else, so we want to change it to sandstone, so we just do that and it does it for you. Or fx cell op, you have to put that op in, and then if sandstone set 50% sandstone, 50% stone, and that'll give you a mix like that. Or you can run it again and it'll kind of gradually give you less and less stone and more and more sand. Yeah, so that's basically everything. There's a few other things. So for instance, with trees like this, you may want to have a brush that pastes in a tree where you're looking at it. And so if you use this command, this will give you that. So here we've got fxbrv is a voxel, so it's a single block brush. Macro, again we're running a macro, and schem is the macro that we're using here. So this is pasting in a macro. Now we're going to want a tree here. So all of the schematics from my tree repository are 16 by 16, apart from the big ones, which are 32 by 32. But then how do we get it to actually paste in? Well, we want to use these offset tools. So in this case, we basically have offset X, offset Y, and offset Z. And what these do is change where you're pasting them. So in this case, I think that should work. That has not worked. Interesting. Well, I'll need to have a play with this, because I don't know why that hasn't worked. But you can see that it's pasted in that bedrock. I think there might be something wrong with the schematic, perhaps. Let's go for oak28, because we know that one works. And this false is about pasting in air. So if you want the air from the schematic pasted, then set this to true. And then this T is optional, but if you want to include mirror arguments, so if you want to mirror it in the x-axis or along the xz axis, you can do that as well. I think there's just a problem with oak1, but you can see that here they're floating a bit. Well, this is because we set our y offset to 5. If we wanted to have it kind of sunk into the ground slightly, you could do -1, or just if you want it floating above the block that you're looking at, or just like on the block you're looking at, then 1 is a good value to use for that. And you can very quickly create a forest with these, especially if you're rotating between a few different trees. And you can create, as I said, you can create a forest pretty easily. So that is pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. One final one to look at is the spike brush. Is quite popular, I think, with map makers especially. So there is a sort of budget way to get this to work. So one of the macros you can use is a macro called the line macro. So here, if I run this command. Cobblestone 21. This will create a line between me and where I'm looking. And it will use as many blocks as I tell it to. So in this case, 20 blocks, cobblestone. So you can see some gaps starting to appear because it needed more than 20 to do that line. But you can choose to set that however you want. And these can be really useful for tree branches and stuff. But ultimately, the lines are not as useful as the spike brushes sometimes. So the way you can do this is, rather than using a radius of 0 on this brush, if you increase that radius, and possibly increase this a bit as well, just to make sure it's nice and full, you will create a brush that, I didn't mean to use that on my hand. You can create a brush that acts in like a spike. So it is possible to do spikes with 14eredit. They're not quite as perfect as they could be yet. I think he is planning on implementing a spike brush, but this pretty much does the job actually at the moment. And you can see very quickly you can produce some quite cool shapes with that. So yeah, that is going to be it for this tutorial. I hope that's given you a good starting point to be going on with 14eredit, and hope that's helped you understand. Whoops. Didn't mean to do that. Yeah, I hope that's kind of helped you understand how to put together your own brushes and how different operations work. There's a lot more that this can do, a huge amount more, and as you could see with these grass brushes, like you've got so much control. You can edit exactly how much grass you want, or you can just, it just gives you a lot of control that you don't necessarily have with other tools. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. That's going to be it from me, and I hope you've enjoyed. Bye bye.